Tonight, I am going to be starting with part 2 of the book Preparing to Die. Part 2 is titled Practical Preparation. And the first part of this is Before Death Approaches. So now is the time to prepare for death in the mundane world. Already the book has covered the spiritual aspect of it. To begin with, the advice is don't leave a mess behind for someone else to clean up after you die. Probably all of us have known someone that has died and not any preparations made, and a family that was left behind had to deal with a lot of things that were difficult, especially at a time of grieving and so forth. And making preparations is actually acknowledgement of impermanence. When someone is approaching death, it can bring out the best and it can bring out the worst in people. And so the more we prepare, the easier it is for the people that we leave behind to take care of all the details that need to be taken care of. And I am reminded of my father, who was a stickler for details. And he had everything in trusts. He had put me on the trusts. He had a list of all the life insurance policies that he had and all this and all that he had. After he died, well, we had already gone to a funeral home of when my mother died, so I had a funeral home, had a lawyer that we went to when my mother died, and I had, I don't know, maybe 15 death certificates, copies of a death certificate made, mailed them off to various places, went to the lawyer with the will, dropped it off, picked it up, I don't know, maybe a month later, and it was done, paid the lawyer the bill, went to a tax accountant the next spring and took all the tax information to the accountant and came back a month later, and that was done and mailed in the taxes, and then distributed the money to everybody in the will. And it was surprisingly simple, but I know if it's not wrapped up so tightly, it gets very difficult. So what we need to do is decide on these areas, like what is unfinished that you really want to finish? Do you have any regrets? Or are just some things that he brings up? Have you found meaning in your life and meaning in your death, or looking towards meaning in your death? Do you have relationships that need to be cleaned up? Do you need to express forgiveness? And then have you written your will, your advance directives, drafted a medical power of attorney? So basically, he looks at it this way: are you going to leave chaos, or are you going to leave a well thought out, thorough plan? So estate planning is to protect our loved ones. And it's important to remember this. As Buddhists, we're always thinking about others, or at least aspiring to think of others. So this, in a way, is also a spiritual practice. It's the act of bodhisattva. So now the following guidelines are fluid and can change. He says, use the internet, and it's easy to stay current with these topics that are discussed below. Now, he says, check with a lawyer if you want. Now, later, when we get to the part written by a lawyer, the lawyer says, always check with a lawyer, that my advice in this book are not legal advice. Check with a lawyer. I would say this, the more there is in your estate, the more you need to have a lawyer involved in writing up all the different powers of attorney, living will, power of attorney for medical care, and so forth. So when writing our will, we want to let go of what we have accumulated. He divides the law into 3 phases of what to do before, during, and after death. So before death, creating and filing all these papers, these legal papers. During death, then the application of the medical and durable power of attorney, living wills, and then after death, the implementation of wills and trusts. He says that, quote, for practical matters concerning death, follow the law. And that's very good advice. I mean, maybe throughout your whole life, follow the law. Don't get in trouble. I used to be a prison chaplain. Behave yourself. So anyway, we want to make things as smooth as possible as we transition. He says, travel lightly through the bardos, through the various documents that we're going to go into. We can transfer our material possessions to others now, or at least make plans. That attachment binds us to samsara, and we want to get out of samsara. It'll hold us back during death if we are attached to our property. Also, attachment can cause pain for those left behind. Because of that, after a person dies, the people that are left behind may want to have a certain object that the person that died owns. Another person wants that same object. I've seen this happen where family members argue over possession that the dead person left behind. It's good to, if at all possible, try to settle things while you're alive, differences that you have with family members and friends, and so forth. He also says that the more money and possessions that the person that dies has, the more often it's a cause of conflict. It can be a mixture of both wanting to remain connected with the person and greed. The interesting thing is that in samsara, even our afflictive emotions aren't pure, that greed can have an element of anger with it, or can have an element of jealousy with it, and so on and so forth. And so during these times of strong emotions, disagreements can come, and we want to make this hopefully as smooth as possible for everybody. Now, I'm going to go through a few definitions. The first is executor. This is the person named to implement your wishes in your will. And a will disposes of your material assets. You can also set up a trust to do the same thing. And this will be your final statement about what should happen to your material possessions. And this will identify who makes the decisions to distribute them. And it can dramatically reduce conflict. And a will can be used to make charitable gifts, can be used to reduce estate taxes, can be used to help heirs, minors, for instance. Then a letter of instruction can be a useful supplement to a will. I had one recently made up, a will, and all these other documents. I went to a lawyer and had them made up. And one thing that was mentioned that I have done is just write down a list of your household goods, chairs, dressers, could even be towels, whatever, the things that are in your house, and say that you would like this thing go to that person, that thing go to someone else. And these can be revised without going to a lawyer. All you have to do is sign the paper on the bottom. Something that I have been doing too is giving away a lot of things that I have, books that I will no longer need, some that I've never read, some Buddhist books, some non-Buddhist books. I went to a Christmas get-together at some friends this last Christmas. They were a Roman Catholic family. There were 3 kids, all married, and all had their own children. And there were some other friends there. I packed up the trunk of my car with things that I own, took them there, brought them into the house, and I said, "Merry Christmas, pick out what you want." And I did not take a single thing back. So there's no reason to wait. If you go through your closets, you'll probably find a lot of things that you can get along without. It's also good to have the names of your attorney, an accountant, financial advisor, and so forth for the executor to have in case they need to contact any of these people. Also, in this list of personal property that you might want to give to individual people that would go outside of your will might be your Buddhist items, statues, paintings, bell and dorje, pechas, and books, and so forth. This can be very helpful and help smooth the process. If you're married, it becomes simpler because legally then your possessions will be passed on automatically to your spouse unless you make an exception. So the next is a living will, and this expresses your choice regarding the use of life-sustaining treatments. And it's very specific, and it's to be used by your doctor or your healthcare agent to understand your wishes. And by making these known, you can eliminate expensive, unnecessary treatment if there is no reasonable hope for recovery. And this, again, will reduce stress and reduce the difficult decisions that have to be made. This should be readily available. You should have a copy of it on file at your medical clinic or medical system. And it would be good to have a few copies of these given to either family members or close friends, just in case. He mentions the website 5 Wishes because this has examples of living wills and other forms and so forth there. I went to the site and looked at it, and it's a very good site, and I recommend going there too. Again, this might be a good preparation while you're working with a lawyer. And if you don't have a lot of property that's going to be dispersed, probably you could make a living will and an actual will and so forth there or other places on the internet. Now, the next is an advanced directive, and this is a written instruction for caregivers that specify the actions that your caregiver will take, what kind of decisions to make. And again, you need to have this readily available, have your health system, and send a copy to the health system. And this, along with your living will help make decisions that you want when you are no longer able to make the decisions. Then there is the medical power of attorney. And here you're giving someone the authority to make medical decisions for you when you're no longer able to. And this person is called your healthcare agent, a medical proxy, and a surrogate. And this person needs to know what to do and when to do it. It's good to have a deep conversation with your medical power of attorney and go through it with thoroughness and clarity, the various things that you want done and don't want done. And this assures you that your chosen representative or agent, not the doctors, will have the final say on the treatment. Again, discuss these in advance. And he has some tips on who to choose for a healthcare agent, because they will be making life and death decisions. So he says they should have a stable mind. Friends and relatives of yours could put a lot of pressure on this person to do what they feel is best rather than what that person feels you feel is best. They need to have a certain emotional distance. It isn't that they're unfeeling, but they are not as swayed by strong emotions erupting in those around them. And you want someone that'll put your wishes ahead of their own wishes. It might be good if they have some medical knowledge and that they would be comfortable in a hospital or an intensive care unit. Then, does your family know and trust them? Are they willing to stand up and fight for your end of life rights? Again, be careful so that you choose someone that will not reverse your orders. And then finally, be very clear to your friends and family what your final wishes are. When I had my documents made up by an attorney last year, he had me choose 3 people for the medical power of attorney and for the other positions too, just in case. If the first one is unable to, then the second one would be called. And if the second one unable, then the third one would be called. So now the next is the durable general power of attorney. This is a person who will basically manage your assets, manage your mundane life when you're no longer able to do this yourself. And you want this person to understand your wishes as much as possible, because you want this person to carry out your wishes. This particular person then will do a lot of things. If you have a home, it would be good for them to know all about your home, the insurance policies on the home, credit cards that you have in your name, bank accounts that you have. If you have a stock that you own, savings bonds, cemetery plots, loans that you owe money on, and so on and so forth. All of this needs to be known by the person that has this durable power of attorney. And then he mentions an ethical will. And this is your personal legacy that you want to leave behind. And what came to mind at that point was a quote by Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, which I'm going to read. Death comes, obviously. You can never avoid death. Whatever you do, death occurs. But if you have lived with a sense of reality and with gratitude towards life, then you leave behind the dignity of your life so that your relatives, your friends, and your children can appreciate who you were. And I think that sums up this ethical will. In the book, he talks about this as a philosophical portrait of the person who died. He said it can be tape recorded, it could be written down, it could be video recorded. It can just go over your life, reflecting on your life, the parts of your life that maybe you learned certain lessons from. It could be your philosophy of life. It could be many things that you would put in there. But this is something that you might want to consider. He says this too. Here are some things to look into. Quote, I believe the most important thing in life are the values or traditions I want to pass along to my family and friends are my core, or what I want to be remembered for is the most important thing I have done in my life is when I am gone, I hope my family and friends will have learned this from me. Life has taught me these lessons. So this document you do not need to go to a lawyer for. This is all your own. And he says, because of impermanence, update all the documents every few years. He talks about how bank accounts and investments pile up unclaimed. So now we go to the section that is more on living wills and advanced directives. Above was the basics. Now we go into this in more depth. So you know more about your affairs than anyone else. Again, you don't want to leave a mess for those that you leave behind to clean up. And so doing any of these things is better than nothing. It doesn't mean you have to do all of them, but even doing a little bit is better than doing nothing. Again, advanced directives are good. They protect you from unwanted medical treatment. Laws differ state to state, and it's good to be aware of what the laws are for the state that you live in or the country that you live in. And again, you can change these. All of these documents can be changed as long as you are alive and competent. So here are some acronyms. AD is Advanced Directive. CPR is Cardiopulmonary Resuscitation. DR is Do Not Resuscitate. DNR is saying, according to Holecek, it's the physician saying no CPR for this patient. Then a DNI is Do Not Intubate, which is putting a feeding tube down the throat of the person. He talks about wearing a dog tag. He said even one person had it tattooed on his chest because if you call 911 and they get there, they're going to want to save your life. That's what they're trained to do. So you want to make these things visible. You want other people to know about this. He even talks about having some of these documents on your refrigerator door. So if the EMS come in, they will see this and have a better idea of how to treat you. The thing about CPR is towards the end of life, it's difficult. It causes broken ribs and a lot of damage, and it might revive the person, but they're in such poor, frail health that it maybe not be such a good idea to do it. But now, even if you have a DNR or a CPR, that they still, EMS can still heal broken bones, bleeding, and other sorts of things, that you can receive antibiotics, chemotherapy, and so on and so forth. I'll say this, that you want to get these things written in the proper form for the country and the state that you live in. I did I think it was a living will, and I had two people signed it, and then when I turned it into my clinic, they refused it because one of the people that signed it was a Canadian, and they had to be US citizens. Again, it's good to look into this before you actually put these things together. Then there is a MOST, which is a medical order for scope of treatment. And this is for the chronically or terminally ill patients that receive medical attention regularly. So you want to go over this with your doctor, your family, your friends. He says use a lawyer because it can get very complicated. And to quote from Holecek's book here, you can dramatically reduce unnecessary emotional and financial burdens for your loved ones and for your government by filling out advanced directives now. Now we come to a section here titled Legal Concerns Before, During, and After Death. This is by Alex Halpern, JD, which means Doctor of Law. At the end of this section, he has this quote: "This section is not legal advice, and that in considering the disposal of your estate, you should consult with your own lawyer. Everyone has individual life circumstances that require specific consideration well beyond the reach of an introductory discussion such as this one." So I tend to go along with this. I'm more familiar with working with a tax preparer than I am with a lawyer. But every year I take my taxes to a tax preparer because the laws are continually changing about taxes. And the tax preparer keeps up on these things and I don't. So I just automatically assume that if I go to a tax preparer, I'm going to be in a better position than if I do the taxes myself. But again, my taxes are complicated for various reasons. So here is another quote from this Alex Halpern. "Beneath the technicalities of disposing of one's property lies the satisfaction of bringing to a close those details that have consumed so much of the life we have led." So this is about what happens to our money and our property when we die. If we don't have a will, it'll be determined by the laws of the state and the United States. And if we have a will or a trust, that will distribute our money and our property. And he says, if you die without a valid will, the law will make one for you. I didn't look up how to pronounce these words, but the first technical legal word is intestate, which is dying without a valid will. intestate. Under certain conditions, it's not a problem. But if you don't have a lot of property, joint property goes to your spouse, life insurance goes to the beneficiary. Some investments and retirement accounts have beneficiaries. Your Social Security account, there are laws that it will follow, and so forth. The next term dealing with wills is the testator, the person that makes and signs the will, which is you. And then the beneficiaries are the recipients of the money and property in the will. The executor is the personal representative who carries out the will. And he says, this is what the lawyer says, if you don't have one made out by a lawyer, but have a homemade one, it can be confusing. And confusion at the time of death can cause conflict. So your executor has a big responsibility to dispose of everything. It's complicated, it's time consuming. Really, it means emptying a house. I know I have seen where they do in cities, they'll just put things out on the curb in a big pile with and a free sign on it. I've also seen a big dumpster by the house where they just throw in a lot of stuff, depending upon how much stuff you have. At some point, the house has to be emptied because it's going to be sold or passed on to somebody else. You need to have plans made for your remains. And for students of Khenpo Karta Rinpoche, the recommended path would be cremation and then interring the ashes at the columbarium at Karmeling. So he talks about how that sometimes the parents have a different religion than you if you are Buddhist, and they might object to a Buddhist funeral or even a cremation. And it's good to work these things out while you are alive.
Excuse me for a minute. Can I ask you a question? It has to do with the columbarium. So my ashes are going there. But one thing I'm not clear on is, as I understand it, the consciousness leaves that body. And those ashes, what's the relationship? Why am I doing that?
Khenpo Karta Rinpoche talked about, you might say, personal law, LHA, that it is for them and that you will benefit by having your ashes in one place and they will be prayed for there regularly. And I don't want to go into it too much more at this point, but that's what he strongly recommended. So he has an example of a clause that he wrote for a member of the Shambhala Buddhist Church. And you can read that if you are interested in knowing more about this. But again, it's best to work these things out with your parents while you are alive. And most of us will live beyond our parents' death. My parents lived to 96 and 94, and it's still been 13 years since they both died. But you never know. You never know. If your parents are still alive, you might precede them in death. Also, of course, we all know this, that it's best to leave the body undisturbed for 3 days. It may be impossible due to local laws, but on the other hand, things are changing. And I know this has been done in many places where the body has been left undisturbed. And it's good to work with the local government officials to get permission in advance. And some funeral directors will be able to help with this process. You might have to make some phone calls, but also it is good to make plans with a local funeral home about handling your body and cremation and so forth. And you may want to have, if your ashes are going to be interred at Carmeling, you still may want to have one of these services where a Buddhist service or a service which is kind of a remembrance of life, a celebration of life is what they call it nowadays. So then comes the disposition of property. This I talked about earlier, and that is that you make a list of your personal property and identify who you want it to receive it. You don't need witnesses, notaries, or lawyers. This can be done in Wisconsin. And this would give you an opportunity to give special things to special people, friends, family, whoever. And again, family dynamics need to be considered and try to avoid conflict. Now, trusts is the next item here. So if you have children that are minors, then you would want to set up a trust for them to manage the funds for the child. And then trust has the settlor, settlor. That is you. The trustee is the person or persons that are managing the trust, and the beneficiaries would be your children or whoever you wish to have this trust benefit. And he recommends leaving a percentage of your estate to your preferred charities rather than a dollar figure, because you never know. I went through this with my lawyer too. You never know what's going to happen between now and you die and how much of your estate is going to be left to split up. Now, here we come to even more technical legal terms. One is a lifetime trust or an inter vivos. And I'm going to try to stick with lifetime because I can pronounce that. But a lot of these legal terms come from Latin. And the settlor is you, the beneficiary is you, and the trustee is you. And you can transfer all your assets into this trust, and then you manage your assets within this trust for your own benefit. And it will include in it provisions for what happens to the trust after you die. And you can avoid probate court by doing this. The lawyer that I used was pretty adamant about avoiding probate. First of all, probate takes time. It's a court, and It might not go exactly the way you would like it, and if you can get this thing done quickly, it works out for the better all the way around. And these lifetime trusts, they are revocable. In other words, you can undo them if you change your mind. The living will and medical power of attorney is next. And this, as I said earlier, this is about if you are incapacitated by old age or sickness, or let's say dementia. This can solve a lot of legal controversy if you have these forms filled out and well written. He says the relentless progress of medical science and technology, things are very, very different than it used to be 150 years ago. Death was a very private matter. You would die at home, most likely, although it would be possible to die somewhere else. But there were no ambulances to take you to the hospital. I'm sure there were no ERs, and on and on and on. Nowadays, of course, your death becomes very public and subject to lots of laws and rules and so forth. And there are lots of end-of-life choices that can be made now. And it's good for you to understand this and understand what your rights are and what your best interests are and what the law thinks is best for you. You have what you want, you have maybe what your family wants, you have the state, what they feel is in the public interest, you have the medical profession that they feel is in the best interest. And then he mentions the media and mass politics, where certain medical issues get a lot of news time, news coverage. There are individuals' right to privacy, yet the state has a certain right to know. And there are social and criminal rules about suicide and euthanasia. And suicide is not good from a Buddhist standpoint either. Euthanasia, again, is assisted suicide, and from a Buddhist point of view, that is not a very good choice. Then you have the physician's ethical obligation to sustain life. The physician, until actually very recently, when they came up with a hospice movement, which we're going to go into next week, the physicians were there to prolong life, to sustain life, to save life, and so forth. So there are all these competing interests that come into play at the time of death. And then you mix that with people that are grieving and are under a lot of emotional turmoil. It becomes complicated. So both the medical power of attorney and the living will come into play when you are mentally incapacitated. But this isn't a clearly defining line. A lot of times it will say things like your primary doctor or two doctors agree that you are incompetent, something like that. And what this means then that you will not be able to provide informed consent. You can't refuse medical treatment. You can't make informed healthcare decisions. So the living will direct your physician on what you want, what to discontinue, and so forth. And to go on here, the next I have down here, more fine print about the details. The living will is limited to one extreme situation. And the medical power of attorney is much more flexible and wide-reaching and useful. So you are empowering another person to make all the medical decisions for you whenever you are incapacitated. If you would then recover, you would then take that decision-making ability back to yourself, and you would have the right to make your own medical decisions. And your medical power of attorney will be making the decisions for you when you're incapacitated. You want them to know very well what your wishes are, what your feelings are, and so forth. And you want them to make decisions that will align with yours. Myself, I chose people that are Buddhist, Tibetan Buddhist, except for one. I chose a man that is Catholic. He's a retired veterinarian. And I chose him because he was in this same position when his mother was dying. And he talked to me about how he handled this situation. And it sounded to me like that's exactly the way I would want him to handle my situation too, given that I will give him these specific things. So you want to have a person that you trust. You don't want to be kept pointlessly alive. He has a quote here that would be written into this. I direct my agent to make decisions concerning life-sustaining medical treatment with the knowledge that I do not want my life to be prolonged artificially, nor do I want life-sustaining medical treatment to be provided or continued if such means are the sole source of my continued living. End quote. To finish up here, your agent may have to make painful decisions. He recommends going to the 5 Wishes website and looking at that again for more clarity about these different documents that can be drawn up and signed.